My name is Lydia Marlowe, 32 years old. The call came at 2:47 on an ordinary Tuesday, slicing into the quiet hum of my office like a blade. I had been buried in acquisition reports, a red pen in my hand, marking figures for a downtown redevelopment project. Chicago's skyline stretched beyond the glass wall of my corner office, steel and glass, thrusting upward, cranes dotting the horizon like skeletal sentinels. My phone buzzed, flashing an unknown number. "Hello, this is Victoria Manning from Elegant Events Planning," a syrup-coated voice announced when I answered. "I'm calling regarding the Henderson wedding this Saturday." That name, Henderson, once mine, my maiden name. The one I had abandoned 3 years ago when the weight of constant dismissal, the endless condescension, became unbearable. My chest tightened even before she delivered her news. "Yes," I said, steady, laying the pen across the margin. "I regret to inform you," Victoria continued, her tone shifting from rehearsed sweetness to something sharp and dismissive, "that you've been uninvited from the wedding. Family's orders. I'm sorry, but your presence would be unwelcome." The line went quiet, leaving only the buzz of fluorescent light above me. I leaned back in my leather chair, stared at the skyline, and exhaled once. "I understand," I said simply. "Great," she chirped, almost relieved. "Well, that makes this easier than I thought. I was told you might make a scene. Anyway, have a nice day." The line clicked. For a moment, I just stared at the phone, then a laugh broke free. An actual laugh, sharp and unguarded, echoing off the glass walls. They had done it. My own sister, Emma, had taken the knife and driven it in, uninvited from her wedding. The irony, though, was exquisite, because Emma's grand celebration was set to take place at Grandview Manor, the premier wedding venue in Chicago, a venue I had quietly purchased 6 months ago under the shell of Marlowe Holdings, LLC. My assistant David knocked, head poking through the door. "Miss Marlowe, your 3 p.m. is here." "Cancel it," I said, still smiling faintly, "and bring me the file on Grandview Manor." 20 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Same number. "Hello, Miss Marlowe?" Victoria's voice was pitched higher this time, brittle with panic. "I am so sorry about earlier. I had no idea. We didn't know you owned the venue." Silence stretched. I could hear her rapid breathing, the way her words tumbled over themselves. Please, tell me we can work this out. The wedding is tomorrow. We can't possibly move it, not with the Ashworth family involved." I let her twist for a beat. "Victoria," I said finally, my voice cool as the glass desk beneath my hand, "I think we need to talk." Yes, of course. I can come to you, or you can come here, whatever is best. Please, Miss Marlowe, we want to make this right." "I'll be there in an hour." Grandview Manor rose from 12 acres of manicured grounds in Highland Park, 30 minutes north of downtown. I still remembered the first time I stepped onto the property, the restored 1920s facade, the sweeping lawns, the ballroom that could cradle 300 guests under crystal chandeliers. The place reeked of legacy, the kind of stage where Chicago's elite cemented their stories. I hadn't bought it out of sentimentality. I had bought it because the bookings alone guaranteed millions. But standing there that afternoon, the irony curved like a smile across my lips. Emma, who had always spoken of me as the family shame, had chosen my house for her fairy tale. Victoria met me in the lobby, practically wringing her hands. She was younger than I expected, 28 perhaps, with a glossy blowout and a fitted designer suit that screamed least success. "Miss Marlowe," she rushed forward, "I cannot apologize enough. Your sister, Emma, simply told me you weren't welcome. She asked me to handle the matter discreetly. I had no idea you were the owner." I studied her face, the nervous flick of her eyes. "What exactly did Emma tell you about me?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "She said you were the family disappointment, that you left the family business to chase some failed startup, and that your presence tomorrow would be embarrassing." A laugh caught in my throat, darker this time. Failed startup. If only they knew. 3 years ago, I had been the star analyst at Henderson Financial Group, my father's investment firm. I lived in that office, 60-hour weeks, my fingerprints on every deal worth mentioning. But no matter how much revenue I generated, Marcus, my older brother, collected the praise. When I pitched ideas, they were dismissed. When those same ideas came from him, they were hailed as genius. And when mistakes were made, inevitable, human mistakes. They were pinned on me. The breaking point came with the municipal bond deal, the one that earned the firm $12 million in fees. I built the models, structured the financing, carried the weight until my spine bent. Marcus took the bow. When I confronted Father, he waved me off. "You're being emotional, Lydia. Learn from your brother instead of competing with him." So I left. I took my savings, my contacts, and every ounce of resentment, and I built something larger than they could imagine. "Victoria," I said now, lowering myself into the office chair across from her desk, "tell me about tomorrow's wedding." She pulled a thick folder into her lap, flipping it open with trembling fingers. 250 guests. Ceremony in the Rose Garden at 4, cocktail hour on the terrace, reception in the grand ballroom. The Ashworths spared no expense. This is easily a $180,000 event. And Emma specifically said I wasn't welcome. She was very clear, Victoria admitted. She said, and I quote, "Under no circumstances is my sister to be allowed anywhere near this wedding. She's already embarrassed us enough, and I won't have her ruining the most important day of my life." Cold clarity settled over me. Not anger. Anger had burned itself out long ago, but something sharper, a decision. "Victoria," I said evenly, "you're going to call Emma. Tell her there's been a problem with the venue, double booked." Victoria's eyes widened. "But that isn't true. And even if it were, there's no other venue in the city that could handle an event of this size on less than 24 hours' notice. Not for a wedding of this magnitude." "I know," I said softly. It took her a moment, then her lips parted in horror. "Miss Marlowe, you can't be serious." "Make the call." 15 minutes later, my phone lit up again. Emma's voice tore through the line, shrill and furious. "What do you mean the venue is double booked? Do you have any idea how much money we've spent on this wedding? The flowers alone were $15,000. This is a disaster." "Actually," I said, calm as still water, "there was no mistake. Victoria called you because I asked her to." "What?" "You see, Emma, I own Grandview Manor. Have for 6 months." Silence thickened the line. I could picture her face, pale, eyes darting. "That's impossible," she spat. "You don't have that kind of money. You're barely scraping by with your little computer business." If only she knew. "Check the property records," I said. "Marlowe Holdings, LLC purchased Grandview Manor in April." Her breathing quickened. "Even if that's true, and I don't believe it, you wouldn't actually cancel my wedding. You're not that cruel." "You're right," I murmured. "I'm not cruel. I'm just not interested in hosting events for people who think I'm an embarrassment to the family." "This is insane. I'm calling Dad. He'll straighten this out." "Please do." The line went dead. I stared at my reflection in the glass, the city shimmering behind it. For the first time in years, the balance of power had shifted, and this time I wasn't going to flinch. My phone rang again less than 20 minutes later. This time it wasn't Emma's shrill pitch. It was a deeper, sharper voice, one that still had the power to press down on my chest like a weight. "Lydia, what the hell is going on?" "My father." I leaned back in my chair, let the silence hang for a second, then said evenly, "Hello, Dad. It's been, what, almost 2 years since we last spoke? How are you?" "Don't play games with me." His words crackled with impatience. "Emma is hysterical, claiming you own some wedding venue and you're threatening to sabotage her wedding. Tell me it isn't true." I tapped the edge of the desk with my pen, slowly, deliberately. "It's true," I said. "I own Grandview Manor, and as the owner, I choose which events to host." The line went silent. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he'd hung up. Then his voice returned, tighter. "You own Grandview Manor?" "Among other properties," I said. "How?" He sounded almost incredulous, as if the idea of me succeeding outside his kingdom was an absurdity. "You left Henderson Financial with nothing. 50,000 in savings at most. You had nothing." "I had more than savings, Dad." My voice hardened. "I had years of contacts from your firm, an understanding of the market, and the drive to build something on my own. And you're forgetting the most important part." "What's that?" "Talent." He inhaled sharply, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of pausing. "Do you remember the Millennium Development Project? The city's $200 million cultural district financing?" "Of course, that was Marcus's deal, his greatest success." "No," I said flatly. "That was my deal. I spent 8 months building that relationship with the city planning committee. I structured the financing, negotiated with contractors, hammered out the terms. Marcus signed the papers and smiled for the newsletter photo. That's the difference." "You can't." "And the Patterson Industrial acquisition?" I cut him off, voice low. The one that earned Henderson Financial $15 million in fees? That was mine too. I identified Patterson as a target. I built the models. I pitched the board. Marcus just presented my work. Silence bled through the line. A heavy, stunned silence. For 3 years, I continued, I carried your business while Marcus and you took the credit. And when I finally asked for recognition, you called me emotional. Said I should learn from him instead of competing. Do you remember that? My father's breath rattled through the receiver. Even if what you're saying were true, which I doubt, it doesn't matter. One property doesn't make you a mogul. You couldn't possibly have afforded Grandview Manor. It's worth at least $8 million. I glanced at the thick folder David had dropped on my desk earlier. Marlowe Holdings currently owns 17 commercial properties in the Chicago metropolitan area. Combined value, roughly $180 million. We hold majority stakes in 3 development projects that break ground next year. And I let the pause sharpen like a blade. We've made an offer to acquire the Henderson Financial Group building. The silence this time stretched so long I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. It hadn't. You're trying to buy our building, he said finally, his voice low, strangled. I already made the offer. Your landlord seemed very interested. Something about Henderson Financial being 3 months behind on rent. A beat of stunned quiet. Then, what do you want, Lydia? I leaned forward, my reflection fractured in the glossy black of the phone screen. I want respect. I want Emma to apologize for uninviting me, for calling me a failure, for treating me as if I never mattered. And I want all of you to stop pretending I'm nothing just because I chose to succeed outside your shadow. And if Emma apologizes? Then she gets her dream wedding at one of the most exclusive venues in the city, and we all move forward like a family that actually recognizes me. And if she doesn't? I turned toward the wide window. Below, the city spread like a board of chess pieces, towers, cranes, streets flashing with late afternoon light. The rose garden at Grandview Manor floated into my mind, the very place Emma wanted to pledge her forever. I pictured the gardeners, still trimming hedges, setting out lantern hooks. Then, I said softly, she spends the next 18 hours scrambling for another venue. This is blackmail. No, I corrected him. This is business. Something I learned from you, actually. The line went dead. An hour later, Emma's name lit my screen again. Her voice, once shrill, had softened into something almost unrecognizable. Lydia? Yes. Mom says I should apologize. A pause, as though the words themselves scraped her throat. What do you think? I let the silence draw out. For the first time, I heard something different, fragile, maybe even genuine. I think you should start by telling me what exactly you're apologizing for. Another pause, then quietly, for uninviting you, for calling your business a failure, for all of it. Her voice cracked on the last words. I don't know how to fix this, but I want you at my wedding, if you'll still come. I closed my eyes. I could demand more. A public apology, groveling recognition, maybe even Marcus dragged into the light. But underneath Emma's entitlement and cruelty, I heard something I hadn't expected. Regret. I'll come, I said finally. Really? Relief bloomed in her tone. Really? But Emma... I hesitated, then added, this conversation never happened. As far as anyone knows, I'm just another guest tomorrow. Not the owner, not the sister you uninvited. Do you understand? Yes. A softer pause. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you. When the line clicked off, I stared again at the city skyline. It gleamed like glass after rain, but behind the shine I could feel cracks, fractures waiting to spread. And somewhere in the back of my mind, another thought stirred. A memory of Marcus standing in our father's office, a smug smile on his lips as he held my financial model in his hands. I had been invisible then. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be. But visibility has a price, and I had no illusions that my family, least of all Marcus, would pay it quietly. By morning, the city had that rinsed clarity it sometimes gets after a night of light rain. I stood at my closet longer than I needed to, fingers grazing fabric until I chose something elegant but forgettable. Navy silk that fell clean from the shoulder. Pearl studs that caught light without asking for it. If this went the way I wanted, I would be part of the room, not the story. I tied my hair back, simple and smooth, and slipped my phone into a clutch, already full of lists I did not plan to show anyone. Grandview Manor came into view the way a memory returns, first as a shape, then in details. 12 acres of green trimmed to a whisper. Boxwood punctuated with late roses, the 1920s facade milk white against the sky. Valet loops were already humming at 3:30 in the afternoon. Staff in black passed like quiet birds between doors, hands full of crystal and linen. I knew their names. I had trained half of them personally after the acquisition. Today I nodded, as any guest would, and they nodded back with the particular politeness of people who know a secret and intend to keep it. "Ms. Marlowe," whispered Anna at the vestibule, all dimples and precision. "Welcome," a beat. "We have you in the third row aisle." A second beat, softer. "Everything is as you asked." "Thank you," I said. "If anyone asks who I am a family friend. Nothing more." She smiled in that tiny way that means understood, then was gone. The rose garden had been transformed since my walkthrough 2 days ago. White chairs fanned in clean arcs. Lantern hooks stood like punctuation along the path. The florists had threaded blush peonies through climbing vines, so the pergola looked alive. The sound team tested a piano loop that melted into the breeze, barely there, only felt once it stopped. I stood beneath the pergola a moment and looked up through the lattice at the square of sky. This was what Emma wanted, a day built to be photographed, a promise staged to perfection. Victoria found me near the terrace doors, cheeks pink, posture immaculate. "Miss Marlowe," she said, and then caught herself. "Lydia, I wanted to thank you again for your mercy yesterday." "Mercy is a large word, Victoria," I said. "I exercise discretion." She laughed nervously, then lowered her voice. "There is something I should clarify. The instruction to uninvite you. The first call was from Emma. That part is true, but there was a second call the next morning from a number I did not recognize. A man, very calm. He said it would avoid disruption if you were kept away." She glanced over her shoulder. "He did not give a name. He knew our internal timelines." "Did he now? I thought you should be aware." Her eyes said more that she was afraid to speak. I followed her gaze and saw my brother standing in the shade of a beech tree, head bent toward his phone, tie perfect, expression unreadable. The old heat of humiliation rose in my chest, then cooled quickly, like water meeting a hot pan. Information was oxygen. Panic was gasoline. I had learned the difference. Inside, catering moved like a ballet. Tall glasses set, then reset, each one a small mirror, a cake in tears under a traveling glass dome. The pastry chef, who called me Ms. M when no one could hear, lifted a finger at me in salute before vanishing through the service door. I texted Marcus nothing. I texted Anna, "Check the generator relay for the terrace." She responded with a thumbs up and a timestamp. It was habit more than worry. I had built this place to withstand inconvenience. I found my seat exactly where Anna had promised. Third row, aisle. The music swelled by a degree. Guests arrived in waves, women holding their clutches like shields, men adjusting cuffs with that practiced nonchalance of people who have never worried if they belong. When my father walked in, the chatter shifted. People do not say it aloud, but rooms bend around certain men. He scanned the space, and I felt the scan pass through me like weather. His gaze slid once, returned, and held. I lifted my chin a fraction, enough to register, not enough to invite. He looked away first. And then Emma. She was a whole painting, all lace and precise light. The dress was theater, but her face was honest. Joy makes its own geometry. When her eyes found me, her mouth unstitched from shock into something softer. She broke from her bridesmaids like a girl who still remembered how to run barefoot. "You came," she said, stopping a breath away, bouquet trembling very slightly. "Of course," I said. "You look beautiful." "Lydia," she whispered, and the name was not a weapon for once. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting today be simple." Simple was not the word, but I nodded as if it could be. She returned to her procession. The aisle condensed into a line of held breaths. The officiant began the cadence that has called people into impossible promises for centuries. I let the words pass over me, and some of them landed. Emma's vows were careful and heartfelt. When Bradley replied, his voice steadied on her name. I watched my father watch my sister. His hand tightened once around the back of his chair. My brother's jaw pulsed. A small wind moved through the garden, and the peony petals answered. The kiss was picture perfect. Applause surfaced like a school of fish. Guests rose. Music brightened. I stayed seated until the aisle cleared, then stood and allowed myself to be carried along the terrace current into cocktail hour. Cocktail hour is where people decide how they will remember a day. The terrace smelled like rosemary and champagne. Servers passed trios of things glossed to a sheen. I was intercepted by a woman in a green dress I recognized from a zoning hearing 2 months ago. "Lydia," she said, touching my elbow. "We met at the Riverview briefing. You asked the only sensible question in the room." She introduced herself again, this time as a vice president at a family office that liked quiet, patient deals. We talked about floodplains and setbacks, about the difference between paper and earth. When she handed me her card, she covered the phone number with her thumb and wrote another number beneath it. "This is the line I actually answer," she said. "Call Wednesday." 2 more conversations found me without me reaching for them. A structural engineer who had read a white paper I wrote under a project alias, a gallery owner looking for a sponsor for a cultural district annex if the council approved Phase 2. Business cards slid into my clutch like small white boats. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number bloomed across the glass. "You always wanted them to see you." For a moment the terrace tilted. It was not the content. It was the tone. I looked around with care, not panic. Marcus was at the bar, back turned, speaking too close to Victoria. My father stood at the far rail facing the lawns, hands in pockets, his profile cut from habit and pride. Emma laughed near the string lights, everything on her shining. I typed a single word back. "Who?" The typing dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. I saved the number under a name that meant nothing to anyone but me. I put the phone away. Victoria drifted near, schooled into serenity. "The band is ready," she said. "We will shift to the ballroom in 10. Anna says the terrace power tested clean." "Good," I said. "You are doing fine work, Victoria." Her eyes softened with relief. Gratitude does more for people than money can. "Thank you," she said, then hesitated. "For what it is worth, I do not think Emma wanted to hurt you in the way it happened." She sounded coached or cornered. "By whom?" I asked, knowing she would not say. "I am not certain," she said, which was its own careful answer. "But if there is anything at all you want me to adjust tonight, even if it is small, tell me." "Keep the speeches short," I said, and she laughed like a person who had been given mercy twice. Inside the ballroom, the chandeliers held light like fruit, tables gleamed, place cards were aligned like a precise hand of cards. I walked the perimeter the way I always did before the first dance. Guests flowed in, a soft tide. The band tested a phrase and then turned it into something that felt inevitable. Emma and Bradley entered to the sound a room makes when it agrees to be happy together for a few hours. I could feel Victoria's glance flick to me when the father of the bride stood and lifted his glass. I did not look back. I watched my father find words he had not planned to say. He chose a safe route, anecdotes polished in the car, gratitude that sounded perfectly sincere, even if it had to be mined from shallow ground. He did not look in my direction, which meant he was aware of me in a way he could not afford to show. When the music resumed, I stepped out onto the side terrace for air. The sky had cooled to that blue that feels like the end of something, or the beginning. The garden lamps blinked on in a slow, staggered bloom. Voices softened behind me. I pressed my palms to the stone rail and let my shoulders drop. My phone hummed once against my wrist. A calendar reminder. IPO Council, updated NDA drafts. I dismissed it with a thumb. A footfall behind me. I knew the weight of it before the voice. "Lydia." I turned. My father stood in the doorway, expression stripped down to something bare. For the first time in a very long time, we were outside the theater together. "Do you have a minute?" he said. "Yes," I said, and stepped farther into the night. The terrace was quiet, except for the hum of cicadas and the muffled rise and fall of strings through the open ballroom doors. My father leaned against the stone rail, his profile caught in the amber glow of a lantern. For once, he didn't look like the man who had built Henderson Financial with sheer will and ruthless precision. He looked older, tired in the edges. "I owe you an apology," he said without ceremony. I blinked, almost laughed at the abruptness. "For what specifically?" His jaw tightened. "For underestimating you, for letting Marcus take credit when I should have stopped it, he exhaled hard, for making you feel you had to leave just to prove yourself. The words, flat as they were, hit places I thought were long scarred. I studied him, waiting to see if this was a performance. His eyes, though, were different. Shadowed, yes, but without the gloss of arrogance. "You suspected Marcus was stealing my deals," I said. His silence stretched. Finally, "I did." "And you didn't stop him." "I told myself it was character building." He rubbed his temple. "I told myself if you were strong enough, you'd fight harder for recognition. That Marcus," he broke off, glanced at me. "What I really thought was that he deserved it more, because he was my son and heir, and you were just my daughter. Someone who would eventually marry, change her name, leave the business." I felt the words land like stones, heavy and deliberate. At least he wasn't pretending otherwise. "You made your choice," I said. "And I made mine. I built something without you, without Marcus." He turned fully then, meeting my eyes. "I see that. I didn't want to believe it, but, Lydia, you've outbuilt us." I slipped my phone from my clutch, pulled up the banking app with a flick, and turned the screen toward him. Numbers glowed pale against the night. "Marlowe Holdings is worth more than Henderson Financial, more than the Ashworths, actually, more than anyone in that ballroom." His eyes widened. "Jesus Christ, how?" "The same way you built yours, Dad. One deal at a time. Except I did it without anyone taking the credit." For a moment, there was nothing between us but the sound of laughter drifting from the ballroom. He pressed his palms flat against the rail, head lowered. Then, softer than I'd ever heard from him, "What happens now?" I let the question hang. For the first time in years, he wasn't dictating terms. He was asking. "What happens now is simple," I said. "Emma has a beautiful wedding. Tomorrow you'll wake up in a world where your daughter isn't a failure but a CEO who can choose whether to work with you or not." He studied me for a long time, face unreadable. Finally, he nodded once. Maybe we could talk business. After this, as equals." I let the corner of my mouth lift. "That depends on whether you've learned how to treat equals." Behind him, movement flickered at the edge of my vision. Marcus, standing just inside the ballroom doors, watching. His gaze sharpened as he saw my phone still lit, the faint glow of numbers on the screen. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those eyes were a storm brewing. He turned before I could gauge more, disappearing back into the swell of music and clinking glasses. My father followed my gaze. "He's not going to take this well." "He never does," I murmured. We stood in silence a moment longer, the cicadas carrying on with their endless song. I thought about Emma inside, glowing in her dress, about Marcus plotting angles the way he always did, about my father, finally stripped of his myth, seeing me not as the daughter he dismissed, but as the rival he never expected. For once, I didn't feel like the leftover child shoved out of the family's spotlight. I felt like the one holding the lamp. "Go back inside," I told him quietly. "Dance with your daughter. Let her have this night. Tomorrow we'll see what's left to talk about." He hesitated, then nodded again, turning toward the doors. The amber light caught in his hair, silver threaded more heavily than I remembered. He looked like a man carrying the weight of a truth too long ignored. When he was gone, I stayed on the terrace, the night air cool against my skin. I thought of the text I'd received earlier. "You always wanted them to see you." The words pulsed at the back of my mind. Whoever sent it knew too much. And something in me whispered that the storm Marcus carried in his eyes wasn't just resentment. It was preparation. Inside, applause thundered. Emma and Bradley must have begun their first dance. I lingered a moment longer, then slipped the phone back into my clutch and returned to the ballroom. The chandeliers blazed, the music swelled, and for now I smiled with the crowd. But my gaze kept finding Marcus at the edge of the room, drink in hand, eyes locked on me, like a man waiting for his turn to move. The ballroom was a universe of light, crystal chandeliers scattering stars across the polished floors, mirrored vases doubling every candle flame. Emma and Bradley floated through their first dance, their smiles curated. But at the core, real. Guests clustered in golden pools of chatter, and servers glided like shadows with trays of champagne. I kept to the edges, an observer pretending to be a guest. But even the most carefully built evening can stumble. It began with a flicker. The chandeliers dimmed, swelled, then snapped back. The music faltered a beat before the generator hummed and steadied the sound. A ripple passed through the crowd, a low murmur of startled voices. Anna appeared at my elbow almost instantly. Terrace relay, she whispered, calm but clipped. We rerouted power within 10 seconds. Guests won't know. Good, I said, though my gaze drifted toward Marcus across the room. He was speaking to Victoria, leaning close, lips curved in a smile that wasn't quite a smile. She looked pale, cornered, her clipboard clutched like a shield. I excused myself from the group of guests I'd been speaking with, a pair of developers who didn't realize they'd just committed to coffee with me next week, and crossed the ballroom. Victoria saw me coming and nearly sagged with relief. Marcus turned, his eyes cool, his glass half raised in mock salute. Sister, he said, voice smooth as lacquer, didn't know you were still in town. You keeping yourself busy? I manage, I replied. My tone gave away nothing. Victoria, everything on schedule? Yes, miss. She caught herself, throat tightening. Yes, Lydia. Perfectly. Marcus's eyes sharpened at her slip. I smiled at him, just enough to let him wonder how much I knew. When I turned away, Victoria caught my hand for half a second, nails pressing into my skin. A silent thank you, or maybe a warning. The cake was rolled out beneath a dome of glass. Guests oohed, cameras flashing. But I caught Anna's glance again, quick, deliberate. She pointed, almost imperceptibly, toward the service corridor. Something was off. I excused myself and slipped through the door. The corridor was cooler, humming with the low grind of machinery. 2 junior staffers stood in hushed panic near a breaker box. It tripped twice during the rehearsal run, one whispered. We thought it was nothing. It isn't nothing, I said, my voice steady. I checked the panel, saw the scorch along one wire. Deliberate or accident, the timing was suspicious. Switch the secondary generator to carry the ballroom load. Quietly. No guest should notice. They nodded, scrambling into action. I stood there for a moment, hand against the cool cinder block wall, pulse measured. If Marcus had a hand in this, and my gut told me he did, it wasn't just petty sabotage, it was a message. I can reach into your house. I returned to the ballroom, expression composed. The music swelled again, seamless. Emma and Bradley were at the center, cutting into the cake while flashes lit the air. Relief washed the room. They would never know how close the evening came to fracturing. Emma found me later, her cheeks flushed, eyes bright. She pulled me aside near the terrace doors, bouquet long since abandoned. Lydia, she said, her voice quiet in the chaos. I don't know what you did, but thank you. Everyone keeps saying it's perfect, and She stopped, eyes wet. I almost ruined this. With what I said, with how I treated you, but you didn't let me. I studied her, trying to find the line between performance and sincerity. For once, I found none. She was simply my sister, stripped of bravado. Emma, I said, a wedding is a stage, but marriage is the play. Tonight is yours. Don't waste it looking over your shoulder. She blinked fast, nodded, then surprised me by reaching out and squeezing my hand, a gesture that belonged to the children we once were, not the women we had become. Later, as guests drifted toward the dance floor, I lingered by the bar. Marcus appeared beside me, too close. His cologne carried the sharpness of cedar and something darker. You fixed the power, he said casually, swirling his drink. Always so competent. Someone had to be, I replied. He chuckled, low. You really think you can rewrite the story, don't you? The family narrative, the disappointment turned empire builder. It's cute, but you forget. Narratives belong to the people who tell them loudest. I met his gaze. Then maybe it's time I spoke louder. His smile tightened, almost a snarl. Then he leaned in, whisper soft. Be careful what you reveal. Some truths aren't yours alone. And just like that, he was gone, swallowed by the crowd. I found Victoria again as the band shifted into jazz standards. Her composure had returned, but her eyes betrayed unease. Keep everything tight, I told her quietly. No surprises. She hesitated. Marcus asked about ownership. I didn't tell him, but he suspects. I know, I said. Let him. Her relief was a flicker, fragile. She nodded and moved away, clipboard steady once more. As the evening deepened, I drifted through clusters of guests. A zoning lawyer who wanted to discuss lakeshore rights, a city council aide who accidentally mentioned a cultural district expansion. Business wove itself into the night like gold thread, invisible to most. But beneath it all, the undercurrent pulsed, Marcus watching, calculating, my father unsettled, recalibrating, Emma luminous, unaware of the storm edges pressing in. I stepped back onto the terrace, needing air. The garden lamps glowed, petals bruised by the night breeze. I pulled out my phone. The unknown number glared at me again, a new message waiting. They see you now, but do you see them? I stared at the words, the ballroom's music muffled behind me, and for the first time tonight, a chill ran down my spine. The ballroom had thinned by midnight, the air thick with the mingling scents of champagne, roses, and tired laughter. Guests drifted toward the exits in waves, silk skirts whispering against marble floors, tuxedo jackets slung over shoulders. Emma and Bradley were still orbiting each other in the center of it all. Two people who, for tonight at least, believed the world could bend around their love. I stood at the edge, watching, unseen yet not. My phone was still warm in my hand from the last message. They see you now. But do you see them? The words coiled in my mind, feeding both curiosity and unease. Marcus hadn't left the ballroom. He lingered near the bar, glass in hand, expression unreadable. The message might as well have been written in his voice. Lydia, my father's voice again, lower this time, stripped of the earlier thunder. He had shed his jacket, his tie hung loose, his face softer than I remembered ever seeing it. He motioned me toward the terrace, away from the remaining guests. We stood under the lanterns where shadows gathered at the rail. He rubbed his hands once together, as though bracing against a chill that didn't exist. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, he began, about respect, about what happens now. I kept my silence, letting him work through the weight of it. He cleared his throat. Henderson Financial isn't what it used to be. You were right about the arrears. Cash flow has been strained. Markets have changed. Our methods haven't. He paused, meeting my gaze. You've built something stronger than I ever thought possible. Bigger, smarter, and I would be a fool not to acknowledge it. A part of me wanted to revel in the confession. Another part wanted to laugh at the bitter irony that it took my empire eclipsing his for him to finally see me. But instead, I stayed still. What are you asking, Dad? I'm asking, he said carefully, if you'd consider a partnership. Henderson Financial and Marlowe Holdings. Projects, developments, a merging of names even. He stopped himself, his pride catching on the last suggestion, but only if you'd want it, as equals. I searched his face. The arrogance hadn't vanished. Not completely, but something had shifted. Desperation tempers men in ways power never could. I'd be willing, I said finally, to discuss business, on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. Which is? That you understand I'm not the daughter seeking your approval anymore. I am the CEO of Marlowe Holdings. If we work together, it's because the numbers make sense, not because of bloodlines. He exhaled through his nose, a sound like reluctant agreement. Understood. For a moment we stood side by side, silent, the city lights flickering beyond the gardens. I wondered if this was what reconciliation felt like. Not warm, not gentle, but a contract written in honesty for the first time. Inside, applause erupted again. Emma had stepped onto the small stage, microphone trembling in her hands. She thanked the guests, voice soft but steady, eyes glowing toward Bradley. Then her gaze flicked briefly toward me. Gratitude passed across her face like a shadow, subtle and quick, meant only for me. Later, near the cloakroom, Emma found me alone. Her gown trailed behind her, the lace catching in the light. She looked tired, exhilarated, undone in the way brides are after the performance ends. Lydia, she said, reaching for me, I don't know how to say this without it sounding small, but thank you for everything, for not letting me ruin us completely. You didn't ruin anything, I said quietly. You learned. That's enough. She bit her lip, eyes glossing. I'll never forget what you did tonight, and I'll never forgive myself for what I said before. I placed a hand on her shoulder, steady. Tonight wasn't about me. It was about you and Bradley. Remember that. Her breath hitched, then she hugged me. Tight, real, the way she used to when storms terrified her as a child. For a moment I let myself hug her back. By the time the last guest filtered out, only family and staff remained. Marcus approached at last, as if he'd been waiting for his stage. Well, he drawled, that was quite a show. You must be proud. I turned slowly to face him. Proud of Emma? Yes. His laugh was quiet, mocking. Don't play modest. You orchestrated half of this night, whether anyone knows it or not. The power outage? Resolved too neatly. The speeches? Suspiciously short. Classic Lydia, always moving pieces, never admitting you're the one at the board. And what about you? I asked. Always in the wings, pulling strings, hoping no one sees your hand. His eyes glittered hard. Careful. Some of us know things that could complicate your little empire. The words lingered between us, heavy, pointed. What are you threatening, Marcus? He smirked. Nothing, yet. Before I could answer, he turned, slipping back into the shadows of the coat racks, leaving the taste of unease in his wake. I walked to the terrace one final time that night, needing air. The gardens were nearly dark now, only a few lanterns burning low. My phone buzzed again, that same unknown number. You're not the only one who knows where the bodies are. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady but deep. Somewhere in this family, in this city, someone else had decided to speak in riddles, and I had a sinking suspicion that Marcus wasn't bluffing. The night had given me apologies, tentative respect, and even the fragile beginnings of reconciliation. But it had also opened a new ledger, one that hinted at secrets not yet unearthed. I slipped the phone back into my clutch, squared my shoulders, and turned toward the ballroom doors. If Marcus thought I would be easy prey in this new game, he had forgotten one thing. I had learned from the best. By the time I finally slipped away, the ballroom was nearly empty. The staff moved with quiet efficiency, folding linens, wheeling away the remnants of celebration, sweeping glittering crumbs of glass and confetti from the floor. The night smelled faintly of roses gone weary and champagne dulled to sugar. Emma and Bradley were already whisked off toward some grand honeymoon, laughter trailing in their wake. I walked through the manor slowly, letting my hand glide over the carved banisters, the polished oak door frames. Every corner whispered back the truth. This place was mine. Not a stage gifted by family money, but a kingdom carved from stubbornness and spite, from late nights and ruthless clarity. Outside, the valet loop was quiet. My driver opened the car door, but I hesitated, gaze turning once more to the glowing windows of Grandview Manor. The echo of Emma's hug still lingered, unexpected and heavy. I had gone to war with her and walked out not as victor or loser, but as something else, an equal finally seen. The city shimmered as we pulled onto Lakeshore Drive, skyscrapers standing like sentinels against the black sky. I leaned back into the leather seat, clutch in my lap, phone buzzing once more, the same unknown number. Another message. They'll come to you now, but not all will come with love. I exhaled slowly. Whoever sat behind that number wasn't guessing. They knew. My instincts coiled. Marcus was the obvious suspect, but the words felt older, more deliberate, almost like someone who had been watching longer than he'd cared to admit. At home, my penthouse spread itself around me in glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the lake, black water broken by chains of lights along the shore. I kicked off my heels, dropped the clutch on the marble counter, and poured a glass of water. The apartment hummed in its familiar quiet. Yet for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt watched. I opened my laptop, fingers moving through muscle memory. Property dashboards lit the screen. Occupancy rates, lease renewals, development milestones. Numbers steadied me, the way prayer steadies others. 17 commercial properties, 3 developments breaking ground, and, glowing bold in my private files, the offer placed on Henderson Financial's headquarters. The cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat. I drafted an email addressed to my father and Emma. The subject line, terms. The body was spare, clinical. I'm open to future collaboration, but only on equal footing, under binding agreements. No more shadows, no more theft. If you're interested, respond by Monday. If not, the offer lapses. I hovered over send, a war stirring beneath my ribs. To demand terms from your own blood is a different kind of violence, one that cuts quieter but deeper. Finally, I pressed my thumb down. The message flew. I stared at the sent folder, the silence of the apartment pressing close. A chime echoed a moment later. Another text. Same unknown number. Good. Now the real game begins. I set the phone down slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth, despite the tension gnawing at me. They wanted a game. They'd forgotten I'd been playing for years. The lake caught the first edges of dawn, a pale gray spreading like ink through water. I stood by the glass, arms folded, and let myself breathe in the new day. For 3 years, I had been the daughter dismissed, the sister erased, the failure exiled. Tonight, they had seen me. Not because I begged, not because I proved, but because the empire I built left them no choice. Revenge had never truly been the goal. Respect was, and now respect was mine. Yet as the city woke beneath me, I knew the story wasn't finished. Marcus's eyes in the ballroom, the anonymous texts, the truths buried under decades of Henderson polish, all of it waited, restless, like cracks in glass that only need one tap to shatter. I raised my glass of water toward the horizon, a private toast to what was coming. Tomorrow they would call me CEO, partner, equal. But tonight I was something sharper. The woman they never saw coming.